The land remembers. The plains held their breath that autumn. No wind moved the grasses, and the sky pressed low and gray, as if something had gone wrong with the air itself. It was the kind of silence that made a person listen harder, waiting for the crack or the scream that must be coming. But nothing came. Only dust, and the far line where earth met cloud, and the suggestion that once, long ago, things had been different here. She had been riding since before dawn, though riding was too generous a word for what she did. The mare beneath her was old, older than was right for the kind of journey she was making, and the woman herself was not young. Not old, but carrying the kind of age that came from weather and work rather than years. Her hands on the reins were cracked at the knuckles, browned from sun, and she did not sit straight in the saddle the way a person does when they have somewhere to be. She sat like someone going away. Her name was Catherine Frost, though she had not heard it spoken aloud in more than a season. She had left the valley where her husband was buried, left the cabin with its door hanging loose on leather hinges, left the small fence she had tried to keep upright through 2 winters. She had left because staying meant watching the fence fall, and she could not do that. So she rode, and the mare followed the old freight trails west, and neither of them seemed to know where west ended. The land around her had once been thick with buffalo, or so she had been told. Now it was thick with memory. You could see it in the wheel ruts that scarred the plains, in the bones that turned up white against the dirt, in the way certain spots along the trail still smelled like ash, though no fire had burned there in years. People had come through this country with promises and tools, and the land had taken some of them and spat the rest back out. Catherine did not know which category she belonged to. She only knew that she was still moving. By midday, the sky had not changed. She stopped near a dry creek bed to let the mare rest and tear at the sparse yellow grass. Catherine sat on a flat stone and ate a biscuit from her saddlebag. It was hard enough to hurt her teeth, but she ate it slowly, carefully, the way a person eats when they do not know how many biscuits are left in the world. She did not look at the horizon. She looked at her hands, at the reins looped across her lap, at the small brass buckle on her belt that had belonged to her mother. She had packed lightly when she left. A wool coat too heavy for the season but necessary for the nights. A pot, a pan, a knife. Cornmeal and salt in a painted tin. A single cotton dress rolled tight at the bottom of the bag. Though she did not know when she would wear it or why she had brought it at all. And a ring, gold and thin, wrapped in a square of calico, and tucked inside the dress where it would not rattle. She had not looked at the ring since the day she packed it. She did not intend to look at it now. When the mare lifted her head and stamped, Catherine rose and led her back to the trail. They moved slowly, and the day moved around them. The plains gave no shade, no variation. A person could walk this country for weeks and see the same grass, the same sky, the same nothing repeated like a hymn with only one verse. But Catherine had grown used to nothing. She found it easier than something. Toward evening, the trail widened, and the ground grew harder, packed down by years of freight wagons and cattle drives, and people moving toward promises they could not see. She passed a marker stone someone had painted white, though the paint had worn to nearly nothing. A mile later, she passed the remains of a wagon, its canvas rotted away, its wheels sunk into the earth like they had been planted there. She did not stop to look inside. She had seen enough wagons. The sun set without color, and the dark came fast. Catherine made camp in a low spot where the grass grew thicker, though she did not light a fire. She unsaddled the mare and rubbed her down with a square of sacking, then hobbled her loosely and let her graze. She ate tea, another biscuit, and drank water from her canteen, and when the stars began to show, she lay down on her bedroll with the saddle for a pillow and pulled the wool coat over her shoulders. Sleep did not come easily. It never did. She lay still and listened to the mare pulling at the grass, to the soft creak of the saddle leather settling, to the immense quiet of the plains at night. Somewhere far off, a coyote called, and another answered, and then there was silence again. She thought about her husband, about the cabin, about the morning she had walked away without looking back. She thought about the ring in the bottom of her saddlebag. She thought about whether it mattered where a person went if they were only going away. The stars turned overhead, cold and exact. Catherine closed her eyes and waited for morning, the encounter. The town appeared at midday, like a bruise on the horizon. Catherine had not meant to stop, but the mare was limping, favoring her left foreleg, and there was no choice but to walk her slow and hope for a farrier or at least a place to rest her. The town had no name that Catherine could see, or if it did, the sign had blown down or been taken for firewood. There was a main street of hard dirt, a row of false front buildings leaning into one another like tired men, and a scattering of tents and shanties beyond. Smoke rose from a few chimneys. A dog lay in the shade of a water trough and did not lift its head as Catherine passed. She led the mare toward what looked like a livery, a low barn with a rusted roof and a corral out back. A man stood in the doorway, wiping his hands on a rag. He was broad across the shoulders, and his face was hard to read. But when Catherine asked if he could see to the mare's leg, he nodded and said it would be $1 and take an hour. She paid him and walked back into the street. The sun was high and merciless. Catherine pulled her hat lower and moved toward the far end of town where a mercantile sat beside a building that might have been a saloon or a meeting hall. She needed nothing from the mercantile. But she went inside anyway, into the dim coolness, and stood near the door while her eyes adjusted. The man behind the counter looked at her and then looked away. She bought a small sack of cornmeal and left. It was when she stepped back into the street that she saw the cage. It stood in the center of the square, if the wide space between buildings could be called a square. The cage was iron, tall enough that a man could stand but not stretch, wide enough for 2 steps in any direction. It sat on a wooden platform raised a foot off the ground, and inside it was a man. He was not old, not young either, somewhere in that span of years where the body is strong but the face has learned what it costs. His hair was dark and long, pulled back from his face with a strip of leather. His shirt was torn at the shoulder and stained with dust and sweat. He sat on the floor of the cage with his knees drawn up and his head resting against the bars, and he did not look at the people who passed. There were not many people, but the ones who did pass made a point of looking. A woman with a basket spat near the platform. 2 men standing outside the saloon laughed, and one of them said something Catherine could not hear. She stood at the edge of the square and watched. The man in the cage did not move. His hands rested loose on his knees, and his eyes were open but focused on nothing. The way a person looks when they have stopped expecting the world to change. There was no sign on the cage, no paper nailed to the post explaining what he had done or why he was there. Catherine had seen cages before, in other towns, holding other men. Sometimes there were signs, sometimes there were not. The result was always the same. She walked closer. The platform creaked under her boots. The man did not look up. She stood there, just outside the bars, and studied him the way she might study a horse before buying it. He had a scar along his jaw, pale and old. His hands were scarred too, across the knuckles, the kind of scars that came from work or from fire, guiding or both. He was thin but not starved. Someone was feeding him, or he had not been there long. "Catherine, what are you doing?" she thought. But she did not move. A voice called from across the square. A man in a vest and hat, walking toward her with purpose. He was older, gray in the beard, and he carried himself like someone used to being listened to. "That is far enough," he said. Catherine turned to face him. The man stopped a few feet away and looked her over, his eyes traveling from her dusty boots to the hat shadowing her face. "You just passing through?" he asked. "I am," Catherine said. "Good," the man said. "That one is not for talking to." Catherine glanced back at the cage. The man inside still had not moved. "What did he do?" she asked. The man in the vest shrugged. "Enough," he said. "We found him 2 days ago on the North Trail. He had a rifle and no good reason for it. We're holding him until the marshal comes through, and then he will hang or he will not. Either way, he's not your concern." Catherine said nothing. The man in the vest waited, then nodded, as if she had agreed with him. "Your horse is at the livery?" he asked. "It is." "Then I expect you will be leaving once she is rested." "I expect so," Catherine said. The man nodded again and walked back across the square. Catherine stood a moment longer, looking at the cage, at the man inside who had not once lifted his head. Then she turned and walked toward the livery. But she did not leave. She waited in the shade of the barn while the farrier finished with the mare, and when he brought her out, Catherine paid him and thanked him and led the mare to the trough to drink. She filled her canteen from the pump. She checked the saddle, adjusted the stirrups, did all the small tasks a person does before a ride. And then she stood there, holding the reins, looking back toward the square. The sun was lower now, the shadows longer. The cage stood where it had been, the man inside it motionless. No one else was near. The street was empty except for the dog, which had moved to a different patch of shade. Catherine tied the mare to the post and walked back. The unspoken pact. She returned to the square as the light began to fail. The man in the cage had not moved, or if he had, it was only to shift his weight from one side to the other. His head still rested against the bars, his eyes still focused on nothing. Catherine approached slowly, carrying a canteen and a biscuit wrapped in cloth. She did not know why she had come back. She only knew that leaving felt wrong in a way she could not name. When she reached the platform, the man lifted his head. His eyes found hers, and for a moment neither of them spoke. His face was shadowed, hard to read, but there was no hostility in it. Only a kind of tired curiosity. As if he had stopped expecting kindness, but had not quite forgotten what it looked like. Catherine held up the canteen. The man watched her, then slowly reached through the bars. His hand was steady. She passed the canteen to him and he drank, not gulping, but measured, the way someone drinks when they know the water has to last. When he handed it back, their fingers brushed, and Catherine felt the roughness of his palm. The calluses that spoke of rope and leather and years of work she could not guess at. She unwrapped the biscuit and broke it in half. She passed one piece through the bars. The man took it and nodded once, a small dip of his chin that might have been thanks. He ate slowly, and Catherine ate her half standing there, the two of them chewing in silence while the sky deepened to purple, and the first stars appeared. When the biscuit was gone, Catherine folded the cloth and tucked it into her pocket. The man watched her, and she had the sense that he was waiting for her to speak, to ask him what he had done or why he was there. But she did not ask. She had her own reasons for not asking questions. "You should not be here," the man said. His voice was low and rough, like something that had not been used in a long time. Catherine looked at him. "Neither should you," she said. The man almost smiled. Ost. Then the expression faded and he leaned back against the bars. "They will not like you helping me," he said. "I am not helping you," Catherine said. "I am feeding you. There is a difference." The man said nothing to that. Catherine turned and walked back toward the livery where the mare was tied and waiting. She unsaddled her and rubbed her down, then led her into the small corral behind the barn. The farrier had gone home, and the street was empty now, except for the yellow glow of lamps in a few windows. Catherine spread her bedroll in the loft above the stalls, climbed the ladder, and lay down in the straw. She did not sleep. She listened to the mare shifting below, to the creak of the barn settling, to the distant sound of voices from the saloon. And she thought about the man in the cage, about the way he had taken the water without asking why she was giving it. In the morning, she went back. The square was empty, the air cool and still. The man was awake, sitting with his back to the bars, his arms resting on his knees. When he saw Catherine, he straightened slightly, and she saw the stiffness in his movements, the way his shoulder pulled as if something there hurt, but he would not say so. She had brought more biscuits, and a piece of dried meat she had bought from the mercantile the day before. She passed them through the bars without speaking. And the man took them and ate. When he was finished, he wiped his hands on his trousers and looked at her. "What is your name?" he asked. Catherine hesitated. She had not given her name to anyone in months. It felt strange to say it aloud, like putting on a dress that no longer fit. "Catherine," she said finally. The man nodded. "I am James," he said. Catherine studied him. James. It was a plain name, solid, the kind of name that did not tell you much. She wondered if it was his real name or one he had chosen, the way people sometimes did when they wanted to start over. "Why are you still here?" James asked. "My mare was lame," Catherine said. "I am leaving today." James looked at her for a long moment, and she had the feeling he did not believe her. But he did not press. He only nodded and leaned back against the bars. Catherine left the square and returned to the livery. She saddled the mare and checked the provisions in her saddlebag. Everything was ready. She could leave now, ride west, and be miles away by nightfall. But instead she led the mare to the trough and let her drink. And then she stood there, holding the reins, looking back toward the square. The day passed slowly. Catherine stayed near the livery, mending a strap on her saddle, cleaning the bit, doing small tasks that did not need doing. Twice she walked to the mercantile and bought things she did not need: flour, a box of matches, a spool of thread. The man behind the counter watched her but said nothing. In the evening she returned to the cage. James was standing now, his hands wrapped around the bars, looking out at the empty street. When he saw Catherine, he let go of the bars and stepped back. "You are still here," he said. "So are you," Catherine said. She passed him the last of the dried meat and a canteen of fresh water. He drank and ate, and when he was finished he handed the canteen back through the bars. His fingers brushed hers again, and this time he held them there for a moment, just long enough that Catherine felt the weight of it, the quiet acknowledgement that something had shifted between them. "They are going to hang me," James said. "You know that." Catherine said nothing. "You should go," he said, "before they think you are part of whatever they think I am." Catherine looked at him, at the scar on his jaw, at the way his hands gripped the bars as if he were holding himself upright. She thought about the ring in her saddlebag, about the cabin she had left, about all the things she had walked away from because staying meant watching them fall. "I will go," she said. But not yet. The echo of the past. On the third morning, Catherine woke before dawn and climbed down from the loft with her blanket still wrapped around her shoulders. The air was cold, wetter than it had been, and she could see her breath in the dim light filtering through the barn slats. The mare nickered softly as Catherine passed, and she stopped to run her hand along the animal's neck, feeling the warmth there, the steady pulse of life beneath the hide. She walked to the square as the sky turned gray. James was awake, sitting with his back against the bars, his arms wrapped around himself for warmth. When he heard her footsteps, he looked up, and Catherine saw something in his face she had not seen before. Not hope exactly, but a kind of recognition, as if he had expected her and was grateful not to be wrong. She passed him a biscuit and the canteen. He took them without speaking, and they sat in silence while he ate, and the light grew stronger. When he finished, he handed the canteen back and looked at her for a long moment. "Why are you doing this?" he asked. Catherine did not answer right away. She looked past him, toward the far edge of town where the buildings gave way to open land. The question sat between them like something fragile, and she was not sure how to hold it without breaking it. "I do not know," she said finally. "Maybe because no one else is." James nodded slowly. He leaned his head back against the bars and closed his eyes, and for a moment Catherine thought he might not say anything more. But then he spoke, his voice quiet and steady. "I had a wife," he said. "2 years ago. We had a claim up north, near the Platte. Good land. We were going to build something." Catherine waited. She did not ask what happened. She had learned that people told you what they needed to tell you, and pushing only made them pull back. "There was a fire," James said. "I was in town getting seed. When I came back, the house was gone. She was in it." He opened his eyes and looked at Catherine, and she saw the weight of it in his face. The kind of grief that does not fade but only settles deeper, like stain sinking into mud. "They said it was an accident," James continued. "A lamp, maybe. But I found boot prints around the back, and the door had been barred from the outside. Someone did it. I do not know who. I spent a year looking, and I found nothing. So I kept moving. I think maybe I am still looking." Catherine felt something shift in her chest, a loosening of a knot she had not known was there. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the small brass buckle from her belt, the one that had belonged to her mother. She turned it over in her hands, feeling the worn edges, the faint engraving that had been rubbed smooth by years of use. "My husband died 2 winters ago," she said. "Fever. I buried him beside the cabin we built. I stayed a year after that, trying to keep the place going, but I could not do it alone. So I left." She looked at the buckle, then slipped it back into her pocket. James watched her, and when she met his eyes, she saw that he understood. Not just the loss, but the leaving. The way a person could walk away from everything they had built and still carry it with them like a stone in their chest. "What was his name?" James asked. "Thomas," Catherine said. "Thomas Frost." James nodded. "That is a good name," he said. Catherine almost smiled. "It was," she said. They sat in silence for a while. Two of them separated by iron bars, but closer now than they had been. The sun rose higher, and the street began to fill with people. A wagon rolled past, its wheels creaking. A woman called to a child. The ordinary sounds of a town waking up, indifferent to the man in the cage and the woman sitting beside him. Catherine stood and brushed the dust from her skirt. She looked down at James, at the way he sat with his shoulders hunched against the cold, and she felt the pull of something she had not felt in a long time. Not love, not yet, but the beginning of it. The recognition that this person, this stranger, carried a grief that mirrored her own, and that maybe that was enough. "I will come back," she said. James looked up at her. "You do not have to," he said. "I know," Catherine said. She walked back to the livery and spent the day as she had spent the others, doing small tasks and avoiding the eyes of the townspeople. But in the afternoon, she went to the mercantile and asked the man behind the counter if there was anyone in town who handled legal matters. The man looked at her with suspicion, his eyes narrowing. "What kind of legal matters?" he asked. "The man in the cage," Catherine said. "Has he been charged with anything? Is there a trial?" The man behind the counter snorted. "Trial?" he said. "We do not need a trial. We know what he is." "What is he?" Catherine asked. The man leaned forward, his voice dropping. "He is a drifter, a thief, maybe worse. We found him with a rifle and no story that made sense. That is enough." Catherine felt her jaw tighten. "That is not the law," she said. The man shrugged. "Out here, it is close enough." She left the mercantile and walked back to the square. The sun was setting, the sky turning red and gold, and the cage stood silhouetted against it like a monument to something cruel and ordinary. James was standing now, his hands wrapped around the bars, and when he saw Catherine, he let go and stepped back. She approached the cage and reached into her saddlebag. She pulled out the ring, the one wrapped in calico, and held it in her hand. She had not looked at it since she packed it, but now she unwrapped it and held it up to the fading light. It was thin and gold, scratched from years of wear, and inside it was engraved with two initials, T and C. James looked at the ring, then at Catherine. "This was his," she said. "I kept it because I did not know what else to do with it. But I think maybe I was supposed to give it to someone. I think maybe that someone is you." She passed the ring through the bars. James took it carefully, as if it were something sacred, and turned it over in his palm. "Why?" he asked. "Because you understand," Catherine said. "And because I think you will keep it safe." James closed his hand around the ring and nodded. He did not say thank you. He did not need to. The test of fire. The trouble came on the fourth night, when the sky was black and moonless, and the wind had begun to rise. Catherine was in the loft, lying on her bedroll, but not sleeping, listening to the mare shift restlessly below. Something felt wrong. The air carried a tension she could not name, a pressure that made her chest tight and her hands cold. She sat up and pulled on her boots, then climbed down the ladder and stepped into the street. The town was quiet, but not the good kind of quiet. This was the silence before something broke. Catherine walked toward the square, her hand instinctively checking for the knife at her belt. As she rounded the corner, she saw them. 6 men, maybe 7, standing in a loose circle around the cage. They carried torches, and the firelight threw their shadows long and wild across the dirt. Catherine recognized the man in the vest, the one who had warned her away on the first day. The others were strangers, or nearly so, the kind of men who gathered when there was blood to be had and no law to stop them. The man in the vest was speaking, his voice low and steady, and though Catherine could not hear the words, she understood the tone. This was not a discussion. This was a decision already made. She stepped forward, into the edge of the torchlight. The men turned to look at her, and the talking stopped. "You should go home," the man in the vest said. "I do not have a home," Catherine said, "and neither does he." She pointed toward the cage, where James stood with his hands wrapped around the bars, his face pale but steady. He looked at Catherine and shook his head slightly, a warning, but she ignored it. The man in the vest sighed, as if Catherine were a child who had interrupted something important. "We told you," he said. "This does not concern you." "You have no right to hang him," Catherine said. "You have no proof he did anything wrong." "We have enough," the man said. "And we have the right because we are the ones standing here with the torches." One of the other men laughed, a short bark of sound that made Catherine's stomach turn. She stepped closer, and the circle shifted, the men move. In to block her path. Let him go, Catherine said, or wait for the marshal. That is the law. The law is 3 weeks away, the man in the vest said. And we do not have 3 weeks. This man is dangerous. We are protecting this town. From what? Catherine asked. A man in a cage? The man in the vest took a step forward, his face hard. You do not know what you are talking about, he said. You have been here 3 days. We have lived here for years. We know what needs to be done. Catherine felt the knife at her belt, the weight of it, the possibility of it. She had never used it on a person, only on rope and game and the occasional stubborn strap. But she thought about it now, about what it would take to pull it free, to step between James and the men with their torches. She thought about whether she had the courage for that, and whether courage even mattered when the odds were 7-1. James spoke from inside the cage, his voice cutting through the tension like a blade. Leave her alone, he said. She has nothing to do with this. The man in the vest turned toward the cage. You are right about that, he said, but she does not seem to know it. Catherine looked at James, and he looked back at her, and in that moment she understood what he was asking. He was asking her to walk away, to let this happen, to save herself, because he was already lost. But Catherine had walked away before. She had walked away from the cabin, from the grave, from everything she had built with Thomas. And she had been walking away ever since, going nowhere in particular, only away. She was tired of walking away. No, she said. The word hung in the air, simple and final. The men shifted, uncertain now, and Catherine saw her chance. She moved quickly, stepping past the man in the vest and reaching the cage before anyone could stop her. She pulled the knife from her belt and held it up. Not threatening, just showing it, so they would know she was serious. You will have to go through me, she said. For a moment no one moved, the torches flickered, and the wind picked up, pulling at the flames. Then the man in the vest shook his head, and Catherine saw something like pity in his face. Put the knife down, he said. You are making this worse. I do not think I am, Catherine said. One of the other men stepped forward, a younger man with a red beard and a torch in one hand. He pointed at Catherine with the torch, and the flames danced close enough that she could feel the heat on her face. Move, he said. Catherine did not move. James pressed his face against the bars, his voice urgent. Catherine, go, please. She did not look at him. She kept her eyes on the men, on the torches, on the shifting shadows that seemed to grow and shrink with each gust of wind. Her hand was steady on the knife, but her heart was pounding so hard she thought they must be able to hear it. The man in the vest raised his hand, and the others stopped. He looked at Catherine for a long moment, then at James, then back at Catherine. When he spoke, his voice was softer, almost regretful. You are a fool, he said, but I will give you until morning. If you are still here, we will do what needs to be done, and you will not stop us. He turned and walked away, and the others followed, their torches bobbing in the dark like angry stars. Catherine stood there, her hands still on the knife, until the last of them disappeared into the night. Then she let out a breath she had not known she was holding, and leaned against the cage. James reached through the bars and touched her shoulder, just briefly, just enough. You should not have done that, he said. I know, Catherine said. They will come back, James said. I know, Catherine said again. She stepped away from the cage and looked up at the sky. The clouds were moving fast, and the wind smelled like rain. She thought about the mare in the livery, about the saddlebag packed and ready, about how easy it would be to ride out now and leave this town and this man behind. But she did not move toward the livery. She sat down the platform beside the cage, her back against the wood, the knife still in her hand. What are you doing? James asked. Waiting, Catherine said. For what? Morning, she said. The quiet aftermath. The rain came just before dawn, slow at first, then harder, drumming on the wooden platform and running in rivulets through the bars of the cage. Catherine had not slept. She sat with her back against the platform, the knife still loose in her hand, listening to the rhythm of the water and the occasional sound of James shifting behind her. When the sky began to lighten, she stood and stretched, feeling the stiffness in her back and legs, the cold that had settled deep into her bones. James was sitting against the far side of the cage, his shirt soaked through, his hair plastered to his head. He looked at Catherine and she saw exhaustion in his face, but also something else. Relief, maybe, or gratitude. He did not say anything, and neither did she. Words felt too small for what had passed between them in the night. Catherine walked to the livery through the rain and returned with her blanket. It was damp, but still warmer than nothing. She passed it through the bars, and James took it, wrapping it around his shoulders. He nodded once, a small acknowledgement, and Catherine sat back down on the platform, the rain soaking through her coat and into her dress. "They are not coming," James said after a while. "Not yet," Catherine said. "But they will." James looked at her. Water dripping from his hair into his eyes. "You cannot stay here forever," he said. "I know." "Then what are you doing?" Catherine did not answer right away. She watched the rain falling on the empty street, on the buildings with their sagging roofs, on the distant line of prairie beyond the town. She thought about Thomas, about the cabin, about all the things she had lost, and all the ways she had tried to make peace with losing them. And she thought about James, about the way he had looked at her when she stood between him and the mob, about the quiet understanding that had grown between them over these few days. "I am doing what I should have done a long time ago," Catherine said. "I am staying." The rain continued through the morning, and the street remained empty. Catherine left once to check on the mayor and to buy bread from the mercantile. The man behind the counter did not speak to her, only took her money and turned away. When she returned to the square, James was standing, his hands wrapped around the bars, looking out at the rain. She broke the bread in half and passed one piece through the bars. They ate in silence, the rain a curtain around them. And when they were finished, Catherine pulled a canteen from her coat and offered it to him. He drank, then handed it back, and their fingers touched again, wet and cold, but steady. "Tell me about her," Catherine said. James looked at her, surprised. "My wife?" "Yes." James was quiet for a long time. Then he leaned back against the bars and closed his eyes, and when he spoke, his voice was soft, almost lost beneath the sound of the rain. "Her name was Anna," he said. "She was from Ohio. We met at a church social, though neither of us was particularly religious." She laughed at that, said it was fitting that we met in a place neither of us belonged. Catherine listened, the rain drumming on the platform, the sky gray and low above them. "She wanted a garden," James continued. "That was the first thing she said when we got the land. Before the house, before anything, she wanted a garden. So we cleared a patch, and she planted beans and squash and flowers. Silly flowers that did not do anything but look pretty. I told her it was a waste of space, and she told me I was a waste of air." He smiled, a brief flicker of something that might have been happiness, or the memory of it. Catherine felt her chest tighten. "She sang," James said, "all the time. While she worked, while she cooked. She had a terrible voice, but she did not care. She said singing made the work go faster, and I suppose she was right." He opened his eyes and looked at Catherine. "I miss the singing most," he said. Catherine nodded. She understood. It was the small things that stayed with you. The ordinary moments that you did not know were precious until they were gone. She thought about Thomas, about the way he used to carve small animals from scraps of wood and leave them on the table for her to find. She still had one, a rabbit with oversized ears, tucked in the bottom of her saddlebag. "I am sorry," Catherine said. James looked at her. "So am I," he said. The rain began to ease in the afternoon, and by evening it had stopped altogether. The sky remained overcast, the air thick and damp. Catherine walked to the creek at the edge of town and filled the canteen, then returned to the square. James was sitting again, the blanket still wrapped around his shoulders. He looked better now, less worn, though the cage and the waiting had carved lines into his face that had not been there before. Catherine sat beside the cage and pulled a strip of cloth from her pocket, one she had torn from the hem of her dress. She wet it with water from the canteen and passed it through the bars. James took it and wiped his face, his neck, the grime and sweat of days in the cage. When he was finished, he handed the cloth back and looked at her. "Why did you give me the ring?" he asked. Catherine hesitated. She had thought about this question, turned it over in her mind during the long night, but she still did not have an answer that felt complete. Because I needed to let it go, she said finally, and because I thought you would understand what it meant. James nodded. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the ring, holding it up to the fading light. The gold caught what little sun remained, glinting faintly. I will keep it safe, he said. I know, Catherine said. They sat in silence as the light faded and the stars began to appear, faint and distant through the clouds. Catherine felt the exhaustion settling into her, the weight of the last 4 days. The choices she had made and the ones still to come. She leaned her head back against the platform and closed her eyes, and for a moment she let herself imagine a different life, one where James was not in a cage, and she was not alone, where they had met under different circumstances and built something together the way she and Thomas had once tried to build. But that was not this life. This life was rain and iron and waiting. James spoke, his voice quiet. Thank you, he said. Catherine opened her eyes and looked at him. For what? For staying, he said, for not walking away. Catherine felt something break open inside her, a small crack in the wall she had built around herself since Thomas died. She reached through the bars and took James's hand, holding it for a moment, feeling the warmth of it, the calluses and scars that matched her own. I could not, she said. The choice to stay or leave morning came cold and clear. The sky scrubbed clean by the rain. Catherine woke on the platform, stiff and aching, her coat damp and her face numb from the chill. James was awake already, standing at the bars, looking toward the east where the sun was just beginning to rise. He glanced down at her when she stirred, and she saw something in his expression that had not been there before. Not hope exactly, but a kind of readiness, as if he had decided something during the night. Catherine stood and brushed the dirt from her skirt. Her whole body protested the movement, but she ignored it. She walked to the livery and brought back water and the last of the bread. They shared it in silence, and when they were finished, James reached through the bars and handed her something. It was the ring. Thomas's ring. Catherine stared at it, confused. Why are you giving this back? Because you are going to need it, James said. For what? For what comes next, he said. Before Catherine could ask what he meant, she heard footsteps. She turned and saw the man in the vest walking toward them, alone this time, his hands empty. He stopped a few feet from the platform and looked at Catherine, then at James. The marshal arrived this morning, he said. Earlier than we expected. Catherine felt her heart quicken. Where is he? At the saloon, the man said. He wants to see the prisoner, and he wants to speak with you. Catherine looked at James. He nodded slightly, and she saw in his eyes that he had expected this, had maybe even wanted it. She turned back to the man in the vest. What does he want with me? She asked. You will have to ask him yourself, the man said. Catherine followed him across the square to the saloon, a low building with a false front and windows clouded with dust. Inside, the air smelled of tobacco and old whiskey. A man sat at a table near the back, a tin star pinned to his vest, a cup of coffee in front of him. He was older, maybe 50, with gray hair and a face that looked like it had seen too much and stopped being surprised by any of it. You are the woman who has been helping the prisoner, the marshal said. It was not a question. I am, Catherine said. The marshal gestured to the chair across from him. Sit. Catherine sat. The marshal studied her for a moment, then took a sip of his coffee. They tell me you stood between him and a mob, the marshal said. That true? It is, Catherine said. Why? Because they had no right, Catherine said. No proof, no trial, just anger and torches. The marshal nodded slowly. And what is he to you? Catherine hesitated. She did not know how to answer that question. James was a stranger, or he had been 4 days ago. But now he was something else. Something she could not quite name. He is someone who deserves a chance, Catherine said finally. The marshal set down his cup. I spoke with him this morning, he said. He told me about his wife, about the fire. He also told me he has been looking for the men who killed her, and that he thought he found one of them here. Catherine felt something cold settle in her stomach. Here, in this town? The marshal nodded. He says he tracked a man to this area, someone who matched the description of a drifter who was seen near his property the day of the fire. But when he got here, the man was gone. Or maybe he was never here at all. Hard to say. So he did nothing wrong, Catherine said. Not exactly, the marshal said. He was carrying a rifle and asking questions that made people nervous. In a place like this, that is enough to get a man caged. But it is not enough to hang him. Catherine felt relief flood through her, so strong it made her dizzy. Then you are letting him go? The marshal leaned back in his chair. I am, he said, but I want you to understand something. He is not safe here. The people in this town, they have made up their minds about him. If he stays, they will find a reason to put him back in that cage, or worse. He needs to leave, today. Catherine nodded. I understand. And you? The marshal asked. What are you going to do? Catherine looked at him, surprised. What do you mean? The marshal smiled, a tired, knowing smile. I mean, are you going with him, or are you going back to wherever you came from? Catherine did not answer right away. She thought about the cabin, about the grave beside it, about the years she had spent trying to hold on to something that was already gone. And she thought about James, about the way he had looked at her through the bars, about the quiet understanding that had passed between them. I do not know, Catherine said. The marshal stood and picked up his hat from the table. Well, he said, you have until noon to decide. After that, I am riding out, and I suggest he does the same. Catherine returned to the square. The cage door was open, and James was standing outside it, free for the first time in days. He looked strange in the open air, smaller somehow, as if the cage had been holding him together, and now he had to remember how to stand on his own. When he saw Catherine, he walked toward her, and she saw the ring still in his hand. The marshal told me, Catherine said. James nodded. He said I should leave. He is right. Catherine looked at him, at the scar on his jaw, at the way he held himself carefully, as if he were afraid of taking up too much space. Where will you go? She asked. West, James said. Maybe north. Somewhere no one knows me. Catherine felt the weight of the question she had been in carrying since the marshal asked it. She looked at the ring in James's hand, then at her own hand, empty and scarred and tired. I could come with you, she said. James looked at her, and she saw something flicker in his eyes. Hope, maybe, or fear. You do not have to, he said. I know, Catherine said, but I think maybe I want to. James was quiet for a long moment. Then he reached out and took her hand, pressing the ring into her palm. This is yours, he said. It was always yours. But if you come with me, I would like to give you something else. He pulled a length of leather cord from his pocket, the kind used for tying bundles or mending tack. He tied a simple knot in it, then another, weaving it into a small loop. When he was finished, he held it up. It was rough and plain, nothing like the gold ring, but Catherine understood what it meant. It is not much, James said, but it is a promise. Catherine took the cord and slipped it over her wrist. It fit loosely, the leather soft and worn. She looked at James, at the way he was waiting for her answer, and she felt the last of the walls inside her begin to crumble. Then we go together, she said. James nodded, and for the first time since she had met him, he smiled. It was a small smile, hesitant and uncertain, but it was real. They left at noon, riding west on the old freight trail. Catherine on her mare, James on a horse the marshal had given him. Both of them carrying everything they owned in saddlebags and bedrolls. The town disappeared behind them, and the plains opened up ahead, wide and endless and full of possibility. Catherine did not look back. She kept her eyes on the horizon, on the place where the land met the sky, and she felt lighter than she had in years. The echo, the legend. They rode for 3 days before they found the place. It was a valley tucked between low hills, with a creek running through it and cottonwood trees clustered along the banks. The grass grew thick there, and the air smelled clean, like rain and earth and something older than memory. James saw it first and pointed, and Catherine followed his gaze and knew without speaking that this was where they would stop. They built a cabin that first autumn, working side by side from dawn until the light failed. James cut the timber and Catherine chinked the gaps with mud and grass. They built it small, just one room with a fireplace and a door that hung straight. And when it was finished, they stood in the doorway and looked out at the valley, and neither of them said what they were both thinking. That this was more than shelter. That this was home. Winter came hard that year, the snow piling high and the wind howling down from the hills. But the cabin held, and the fire stayed lit. And they survived. In the evenings, James carved small figures from scraps of wood, his hands moving with the same careful precision Catherine had seen when he tied the leather cord around her wrist. He made a horse, a bird, a woman with her arms outstretched. He lined them up on the mantel, and Catherine watched them grow into a small wooden family. She planted a garden in the spring, beans and squash and a row of flowers that served no purpose but to be beautiful. James smiled when he saw them, and Catherine knew he was thinking of Anna, of the garden she had wanted, and the life she had tried to build. They did not speak of it, but Catherine tended the flowers carefully, and James never suggested pulling them up. The years passed quietly. They worked the land, raising a few cattle and chickens, trading with the occasional traveler who passed through the valley. They spoke little, but the silence between them was comfortable. The kind that came from knowing another person so well that words became unnecessary. At night, they sat by the fire, James carving and Catherine mending, and the wooden figures on the mantel multiplied until there was no more room. One evening, as the light faded and the fire crackled, James set down his knife and looked at Catherine. She glanced up from her sewing and met his eyes, and she saw in them the same question she had been carrying. "For years, do you ever regret it?" he asked. "Coming with me?" Catherine set down her needle and thought about the question. She thought about Thomas, about the cabin she had left and the grave beside it. She thought about the cage in the town square, about the rain and the knife and the choice she had made to stay. And she thought about this valley, this cabin, this life she and James had built together out of loss and longing, and something that might have been love, or might have been something better. "No," she said, "I do not regret it." James nodded, and Catherine saw the relief in his face, the loosening of a tension he had been holding for years. He picked up his knife and returned to his carving, and Catherine returned to her sewing, and the fire burned on. They grew old together in that valley. Their hair turned gray, their hands grew stiff, and the work became harder. But they did not leave. They had spent too much of their lives leaving, and they were done with it. This was their place, their small corner of the world, and they would stay until the land took them back. James died first, on a cold morning in late winter. Catherine found him in the barn, slumped against the wall, his hands still holding the bridle he had been mending. She buried him on the hill above the cabin, under the cottonwood tree where they used to sit on summer evenings and watch the sunset. She carved his name into a wooden marker and placed it at the head of the grave, and beside his name she carved Anna's, so that the two of them would be remembered together. Catherine lived another 5 years after that. She tended the garden, fed the animals, and kept the fire burning. On quiet evenings, she sat by the hearth and looked at the wooden figures on the mantel, the small family James had carved, and she felt his presence in the room as clearly as if he were sitting beside her. When travelers passed through, she offered them food and water, and sometimes they asked about the cabin, about the woman who lived there alone. She told them it was not always alone, and she told them about James, and about the town with the cage and the choice that had brought them here. Some believed her, some did not, but they all remembered. Catherine died in her sleep one spring night, the windows open and the smell of flowers drifting in on the breeze. The travelers who found her buried her beside James, under the cottonwood tree, and they placed the wooden figures from the mantel on her grave. Over time, the cabin fell into disrepair. The roof sagged, the door came loose, and the walls began to crumble. But the graves remained, and the cottonwood tree grew tall and strong, and people still spoke of the woman and the man who had lived there, who had found each other in a cage and built a life in a valley where no one thought to look. Years later, long after the cabin was gone and the valley had returned to grass and silence, travelers still stopped at the cottonwood tree. They said you could feel something there, a presence or a memory, something that lingered in the air like smoke. Some said it was the woman, still tending her garden. Others said it was the man, still carving his wooden figures by the fire. And some said it was both of them, together, the way they had always been. The land remembers. It holds the stories of those who walked it, who built and broke and loved and lost. And in that valley, beneath the cottonwood tree, the land remembers Catherine and James, not as legends, not as myths, but as two people who chose each other when the world gave them every reason not to, who stayed when staying was the hardest thing, who built a home not from wood and stone, but from presence and care and the quiet understanding that sometimes love is just another word for not walking away. The creek still runs through the valley, the grass still grows thick, and on certain evenings, when the light is just right and the wind carries the scent of flowers, you can almost see them, a woman and a man, sitting on a hill beneath a cottonwood tree, watching the sun set over a land that finally, mercifully, let them rest.